I am thrilled this evening to be joined by four alumni from all over the country for another program that we are offering on alumni insights from high growth careers. And in this one, we're going to be talking about building a high growth career in state, county, and local government. I am thrilled. We've had a fantastic response from students and alumni joining us this evening. So we're going to start by having each of our alumni, I asked them to just do a quick overview about their career path and where they are now. They all have very different career paths, so I will also drop into the chat box their LinkedIn. But then I want to make this as interactive as possible, so please be ready to ask questions once they're intros. Raise your hand, put it in the chat box. You all are here to hear from me. So we're going to start with the person furthest away from us, all the way coming from Colorado. Laurel, we'll start with you.
It is great to be here. My name is Laurel Varnell, and I am currently the director for the Office of Housing Recovery, which sits in the Division of Housing for the state of Colorado. My career journey started when I was in grad school. Got my MPA, graduated in 2020, and while I was at GW, I worked for DC government in the DC Department of Human Resources, and I started as an intern. That got to a full job. I think it's DLP, District Leadership Program was the name of it. So that is how I started. And then Denise very wisely advised me to start looking into fellowships. And so I applied for the ICMA Fellowship, International City Managers Association. And I was matched with Sarasota County, was a great fit, Sarasota County, Florida, and decided in March of 2020 to move to Florida for a year and see what happened. So I moved to Florida and worked for the county government right when we received millions of dollars in CARES Act funds, which at the time was more money than the county even knew what to do with. And so I was in a really unique position to be able to run our small business grant. We were giving out $50,000 to local businesses to help them through COVID. And so when that ended, we received a lot of money for emergency rental assistance, and I was asked to become the program manager for that program to help folks who were in imminent threat of eviction during the pandemic. So I ran that program for a few years. And right when that program was ending, Sarasota County was hit by Hurricane Ian, and the county received over $200 million in community development block grant disaster recovery funds, and I was asked to oversee that funding initiative. So I did that for a year and then relocated out to Colorado with my fiance. And now I oversee several different initiatives for the state of Colorado, including our emergency rental assistance program, emergency mortgage assistance program. I oversee disaster recovery with the focus on housing, and also ways to incentivize building more affordable housing across the state. So I do a little bit of everything in my current job, and do you want to pass it to someone? Denise, are you going to?
I will go from Laurel. Jonathan, you're right across my screen, and you kind of also were still in the, you went through the pathway that she also, or different program within DC government. So we'll pop it over there.
Sure. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jonathan Rogers, currently the director at DC government's agency called the Department of For-Hire Vehicles. We regulate the taxis and the Ubers and the Lyfts and the DoorDashes of the world. I graduated from GW in 2011, I believe, with my MPP, and did that while I worked at National League of Cities here in DC. So I think my first real job in DC was for a consultant, oddly enough, doing like some federal contracting. Then quickly went into the nonprofit world with NLC, which was great. Got to work with mayors all across the country. And then when I finished my MPP, I had decided that I wanted to work directly, for a city, not just with cities, and participated in the Capital City Fellows program, which DC government still offers, and it's a great sort of rotational program where you get to every 6 months kind of work for a new agency. So I did that. That turned into a full-time job in Mayor Gray's budget office. From there, I went to DDOT, which is the District Department of Transportation, which is really, kind of what my hope was, where I wanted to be in that field and try that out. And after that, I ended up back in Mayor Bowser's office for a deputy mayor, the office of I'm forgetting a deputy mayor of operations and infrastructure. And so did that for several years, always working in kind of the same cluster of agencies. And then when the Department of For-Hire Vehicles needed a director, I was kind of called up and moved into that role. And I've been there for 2 years. So that's how I got where I am today. I think we've already heard sort of like all of the opportunities and security even that can come in a local government like public service role. So that's served me well, and I'm happy to be where I am. So thanks for having me tonight.
Fantastic. Let's go from DC to New York City.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet all of you virtually. I'm Julia Kirsten, and I'm currently the deputy mayor for operations in New York City. Just recently appointed a few months ago, so it's been a wild ride. I graduated GW both undergrad in 2005, and I got a graduate degree in MPP in 2007. I also went the fellowship route. I felt like wholly unprepared for regular employment. I finished having gone straight through, and I was 22 years old, and so I took a similar fellowship to Capital City Fellows, but at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which is sort of an odd special district of, it kind of functions like its own little level of government. And they also have a 2-year rotational fellowship program. And I went there. My last rotation was in a front office, and I was placed on a capital program that was a priority to the governor of New Jersey at that time. And kind of fell in love with the mega project pace, delivering large infrastructure projects. And I did that for the next 10, 12 years. I worked that large bridge project that I had been placed on at the Port Authority. And then I went to the City of New York and the de Blasio administration where I was delivering a number of large infrastructure resiliency projects, flood protection projects after Hurricane Sandy, Tropical Storm Sandy, and also a pretty large criminal justice program where we're closing Rikers Island and building a number of smaller community-based jails around the city. So I was delivering that a number of years ago. Then I went to the Gateway Development Commission, which is a special purpose entity that is tasked with delivering the Hudson Tunnel Project, which is a $16 billion rail tunnel between New York and New Jersey that finally got its full funding in 2023 and is now a few years into construction. I worked on that project for a couple of years and then headed over to the MTA, which runs the subway system here in New York, and worked to deliver the next phase of an expansion of the Q line here in the city of New York. That project also got its full funding in 2024 and has now been under construction for a little while. I went from the MTA to Governor Hochul's office, where I was the deputy director for infrastructure there, leading the state's infrastructure agenda for the last few years, where I was sort of pretty happy, actually. And then in the middle of December, got a phone call asking if I would come serve as the deputy mayor for operations. And as I always say, I serve at the pleasure. And I am now responsible for Department of Transportation and the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Parks and Recreation and an alphabet soup of almost every operating agency in the city of New York. It's a pretty significant responsibility, but so far it's been quite a lot of fun. During grad school, I did some work at the federal government level, and I've obviously worked at the state level and the local level. And I really find like the closer you get to direct service delivery, the more rewarding the work is. You just, not only do you move faster, but, like at the state level, 60% of New York State's budget is grant making. It's much higher at the federal level, right? But when you get down to the municipal level, you're really just very real-time impact in people's lives, and that can be good or bad, but it's really, really rewarding in any respect. And so I highly recommend state and local government. And I'm sure we can all talk about why later. And I will kick it. Um,
Clark.
I'm going to kick it to our next person before answering questions. Is that okay?
Yep, that's great. Clark, we'll bring it over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to hear from the other folks on the call tonight. And I'm excited for state and local government just listening to them. I came out with my MPP in '05, so I feel like the old person on the panel. From the DC region originally, from Northern Virginia, and did some private sector consulting, government consulting out of LMI Consulting out of GW. Worked for a few years at the federal level for a federal commission on what was called the Commission on Wartime Contracting, where we kind of audited contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan, did that for a few years and worked for Senator Mark Warner, our home senator here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Honestly, kind of got a little bit tired of kind of the inside the Beltway, um, just atmospherics at the time and wanted to get closer to kind of getting things done and moved to Richmond in 2011. So had our firstborn and literally moved from the hospital to outside of Richmond. I was there for 12 years. 8 of those years, I served as the governor's chief of staff for as lieutenant governor and for as governor. And so, um, experience of a lifetime. It was great. We did all sorts of cool things from expanding Medicaid to increasing the minimum wage. First Southern state to get rid of the death penalty. First state in the country to ban no-knock warrants. Named best state for business 3 out of 4 years. Passed a really sizable piece of legislation called the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which has resulted in a lot of solar and wind being deployed in the state. But doing that for 8 years is kind of unusual to stay in that position that long. My wife also served in those two administrations as our Secretary of the Commonwealth, which all
Wow.
that means is she was Secretary of State, but Virginia's a little bit snotty, so it calls itself a Commonwealth. And so when those terms were over, 4 years ago, moved back to Alexandria. We're outside DC, and I run a council of government, so a lot of big metro areas. They all have a metropolitan planning organization that does the transit transportation planning. And a lot of big metro areas realize that they have more than just transportation and transit to coordinate on. They should coordinate on housing, on the unhoused, on public safety, on social services. And so the Metropolitan Washington Council of Government houses our MPO for the region, but also works on a number of those other issues. So we work with the 24 local governments in and around the district. So the district is a member, so Mayor Bowser is on our board, as is the council president of DC, and they're kind of counterparts in Northern Virginia and suburban Maryland. So I love it. I echo the comments that were made. Love all kind of levels of government, but really find a lot of satisfaction in bringing an idea to ground and implementing it. And I've found a lot of success and satisfaction doing that at the local and state level. So.
Fantastic. This is great. I would love to open it up to questions. There is a lot of people here that I'm sure have a lot of questions, so bring it on. There's nothing right now in the chat. I've been putting a lot of things in the chat, an internship, but please raise your hand. I can't believe there's no questions. Come on. There we go. Anicia, we'll start with you.
Hi, I am class of 2025, so it's nice to meet you all and be here. Thank you for your time. My question is, public service is changing rapidly. What is one of the future trends in local or state government that you think isn't getting enough attention yet, but will be a major factor in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm happy to start if you, all right. Personally, I think I don't know, I can't speak for everywhere else, but I think one of the lessons that the public took from government during COVID is how quickly we can move when we really when we have funding and all the laws disappear because it's an emergency. But anyway, and so there's like an expectation. I think there's a real expectation of service delivery that has just shot up since before COVID, when I think we really showed that we could react quite quickly. And now the expectation, at least here in New York, is that we can handle anything all the time and be really responsive to the needs of everyone. And so I think we've really been pushing our public sector, certainly at the local level, to do more and more and more and more. I think one of the funnier examples during the recent snowstorm for some reason there was like a spate of people just like not picking up their dog poop for some reason, and the public created like a massive campaign. Why isn't the government picking up everyone's dog poop? Just this expectation that the government is going to be able to react quickly to the changing conditions on the ground and meet the needs of everyone. I think we certainly can. We're not picking up people's dog poop, but I think you get what I mean. And so I think that has sort of created an expectation, and we're working to meet it.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think the only thing I would add to that, for at least for us in DC, it's not really, it's almost a cliche, but um, we're faced with doing more with less these days. Like we're having a big, economic impact from what's going on with the federal government, and less, of a presence in our local economy. And so it's hard to believe, but for the first time in my DC government career, we've had like a few bad budget years in a row. And so that's been a new challenge for me. I'm lucky that we've always been growing, and now we're sort of having to shrink and make tough decisions. And so I think that's kind of like an evergreen skill and theme that will always be trending, is how to be good stewards of those resources and meet those public expectations that Julie was talking about, when kind of the expectations are rising, but the resources are going the opposite direction. And that goes all the way up to like the district's economic development policy, and trying to not be so dependent on one economic engine with the federal government here. So I think that's what a lot of people are thinking about in DC right now.
I would, I think I read an article, well, don't read it, I live it every day, right, where there's, up to 5 generations in the workforce right now. And I think there's this kind of wildly divergent expectations of what the work culture is supposed to look like. And so I always am trying to become better at just being a good manager and leader of people. And, hybrid workforce, I talked to Dr. Newcomer at the school a bunch, that's particularly at the federal level, when you get really, really large staffs, it's a skill set that, when I was in school, that wasn't taught. I'm not sure it's being taught now, but it takes, that's something I think folks are going to need to be pretty good at, is how do you manage a hybrid workforce, and how do you manage a workforce that has lots of different generations in it, and expectations and motivations, and make it a place where you're excited to come in and work. So that's an area that I know I can improve. If you all are coming out and are able to think about that a little bit, and be effective at it, I think that's going to be a value add.
We had a couple questions in the chat that I want to get to, and then Kalia, I see that you have your hand raised. Damon asked a question about shifting between policy areas, for people who are working in policy but not in the issue area that you want to work in, and how did you navigate these shifts and demonstrate to future employers that you're capable of working in these different policy areas? So I want to tackle that.
Go
Jonathan, you've
ahead.
gone between, yeah, I know that you've gone between a couple, yeah.
I'll start with I think for what like a lot of policy areas, there's a lot of overlap where you don't always expect it. And so I'd say don't let that deter you if you're not working in exactly what you want to be doing. I started working at DC Department of Human Resources, and I was like, I don't want to work in HR policy. But the like skills and lessons that I learned from working on developing policies that impacted the entire DC workforce are ones that I still use now working in housing. So I'd say even if it doesn't immediately seem very relevant, I promise you the work that you're doing is going to be transferable just by the nature of being in government. Or so if you're not in the exact policy niche that you want to be in, I would still kind of play it out, see what happens, and seek out opportunities to try to expand where you are. But I absolutely have transferable skills that I have from working in the DC Department of Human Resources that I do in working for the state of Colorado.
Yeah, I would second all of that. I started off in education policy and that's not where I wanted to be. I wanted to do transportation and, environment and infrastructure. And I think you just try to get as close as you can to that issue area. But just like Laurel said, like you're gaining all these skills that are going to be similar functions in whatever field or policy area. And you're doing it, like I said, try to, if you're working in a city already, or sort of that level, you're just doing a different topic, but it's really similar functions and the skill sets are the same. And then I think too, there's kind of the silver lining with maybe a role you weren't dreaming about, but you ended up in. There's plenty of government functions that people don't dream about. I think, like whether it's procurement or budgeting or HR, but I've found that when you gain that experience, if it's something other people shy away from, it's kind of a superpower later because you're like, oh, you're a policy analyst, but you actually understand the budget, or you know how procurement works. So you're definitely not wasting your time if you end up in a different office, with a slightly different role. I think it's actually kind of you're gaining more skills, and then hopefully you just make that jump at some point into the area you really want to be in.
And sort of switching into that next question about the fellowship, I think it's one of the things that's really beneficial about these fellowships. Changing jobs every 6 months where you really got the chance to learn and sort of practice the translating those skill sets across these new environments. It really demonstrates how translatable these things are in ways that you would not have known otherwise, and where you don't necessarily have to convince every new boss that you already knew how to do it. And so it's a real opportunity to like identify those patterns and develop those skills that are sort of universal across all of these different kinds of jobs and help you understand how to translate that when it's time to look for permanent work.
Just kind of round out by a couple things. One, obviously doing the current job you're at really well, right? And the folks that are on this call like do a good job of to be on a team. If you're a producer and know how to get things done, that's important, right? I'll also say, I had a goal to try and get kind of as high up as I could working for an elected official at the state level to effectuate policy. And because I'm kind of, we all have policy or administration backgrounds, and that's kind of tough in today's day and age. And I think kind of working in that for elected officials can sometimes have a bit of a bad reputation. But, well, not bad reputation, but I was at GW, the School of Public, Political Management, and the MPP folks. It was almost like the universes didn't cross. And I would just say the more folks that are on this call that are willing to go that route and work in those spaces, the better it is at all levels of government. And the folks that aren't willing to do that, that don't have your backgrounds, that work for electeds, then we're going to cede that space to folks that don't have background in public policy, that don't have background in good sound decision making. Um, and I say that because if you do work for an elected at the local level, you get to work on a lot of different issues. When we built out the policy team for the governor, one person would be responsible for 3 to 5 subject areas, right? And that's so you weren't limited to just one thing. And I really enjoy that. And that's a little bit different, right? You have to be maybe an inch deep, and a mile wide versus becoming a specialist in a certain field. But I wouldn't, whether it's a council member or whether it's a delegate or senator, at the state level, you're going to be able to work on everything from education to wastewater treatment, to, like you name it. Like you're going to have to get smart on those things. And then you will be able to make a jump from there if you find something you really like and go to a state agency or continue your path in a different space and specialize a bit.
Great. I'm going to go over to Kalia.
Thanks, Denise. Hi, nice to meet you all, and thank you for presenting today. So my name's Kalia. I graduated with the class of 2025. I'm a Bronx, New York City native, and then moved to the DC area to pursue my graduate degree, worked in federal government and then state government. And now I'm looking to return to my hometown to be a public servant there. So I guess I have 2 questions for the panel. One, do you have any advice for someone looking to pivot from the state government level to the local government level, and then additionally cross state when you've made a lot of professional connections in the area where you are currently.
I'll talk a little bit about my switch from, I went the opposite way. I went from county to state, but switching states. So I was in Sarasota County, Florida, where I had great connections, a great job, and decided to uproot my life and move to Colorado to follow my fiance, which at the time was very scary, but ended up being the best decision I could have made. I think one of the things that I didn't necessarily realize that it's worth at least checking out that many local and state governments have residency requirements. So like the state of Colorado, you have to be a Colorado resident to even be eligible for a job. I know like DC government, you don't have to be, but you do get priority points for being a DC resident. So that's just something to consider too, that for me, I wouldn't have been able to get the job I have now if I hadn't have like uprooted my life and moved back. But then once I got here, I was networking like crazy. I was talking to anyone who would talk to me in the Denver area on the state level, and really got lucky to be where I am now. So I'd say don't be scared to take some bold choices, especially if you have family, it sounds like, in one area. But for me, really worked out and had kind of a few months in transition where I wasn't sure exactly the direction I was going, but really was diligent about networking and going to any and all events that I could that were remotely related to local and state government that I could find.
And I switched back and forth like 4 or 5 times between state and city government over the last 15 years here in New York. And massively translatable work. I think really understanding the interfaces between city and state government helps on both sides, right? Especially if, in a larger city and understanding where the limitations are. And I swear, I really didn't understand how great it is to make laws until I got to make a couple. I can't speak, I can't reiterate what Clark said more. It's like very, very exciting to get to work for elected leaders and participate in lawmaking. It's like a different kind of thing that I had not understood until relatively recently. We're doing a lot of hiring in New York. Let me know if you see anything that is exciting to you. Don't be a stranger, reach out. It's a really fun time to come work in New York, and we're doing really fun and exciting things in the Bronx too. And one of the things we're really focused on is making sure the administration is hiring from all 5 boroughs. So come on home and don't be a stranger.
I'm going to go to Nate and then to a couple questions in the chat. So Nate.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Class of 24 MPA. I had a question I put in the chat, but I actually wanted to follow up with a different one. A lot of you mentioned fellowships like ICMA and others, and those sounded like great opportunities to break in. But as someone coming up on 2 years here since I graduated and having taken a slight detour into more federal focus in some ways, um, are most of those fellowships just limited to recent graduates, and are there other more well-run or recommended paths for someone who may not qualify for all of those, graduate-oriented fellowships anymore?
And before you answer, I'm also going to put a link to something we have on our website. We have a huge list of fellowships and a huge list of state and local fellowships on our website that we keep active. So just putting a plug for that, and then I'll let you all answer.
The ones I know about are all targeted towards recent grads. So I'm not really aware of like mid-career supports, which is certainly an area for change, because certainly it's helpful to help people pivoting. But I don't think that should limit you necessarily. There's lots of opportunities. And I think there's a lot of good work. I mentioned earlier this Work for America organization that's doing just a lot of great work matching folks to state and local jobs around the country. And I think what I always say is it's really helpful when you apply for a job for that hiring manager to get your information a second way. right? And so having an organization like Work for America be the second way they hear about you, or anyone else who's able to, I've always said I'm always happy to be anyone's second way, but I think that that can really be helpful in looking for work. And then once you get inside organizations, there are lots of like resource groups that I think since I started doing these fellowships a long time ago, now these organizations have set up these resource groups to like connect people and do some of the work that I think the fellowship did for me when I first got there, of like having a network of peers within the organization to help me understand the organization and move laterally around the organization. And so I think there is just generally more supportive public sector workforces now than maybe 20 years ago. And that's something that, folks can benefit from, even if they're not benefiting from a specific entry level fellowship program.
Yeah, Nate, I mean, you all thanked us for getting on, but thank you all for being on. And like, this is not the easiest time to be coming out of graduate school or have been a couple years post grad looking to make a switch, like to be just honest and upfront about that, right? Like and that's one of the reasons why I think we've all talked with the leadership of the graduate school to point out that, hey, while I mean, I went to GW thinking career in federal government, career on the Hill, something like that, and took a different direction. And you are sitting between you're sitting in a great state in the District of Columbia, which has a wonderful city government, and then two fantastic states that hire right now in Maryland and Virginia. So, if you're in school, knock out as many of the internships as you can while you're in school to say, okay, and test something out, whether you like it or don't like it. Some of the fellowships are for recent grads, maybe a year or two out. The Virginia has a Governor's Fellows program where the folks have been out a year or two. You can look at that. But it is at the federal level. I mean, I'm not saying anything that's like you all haven't experienced. It's not the same environment that it was a year or two ago with hiring. And so there are a lot of folks out there looking, and I think there's more value in doing things like this. Getting on boards and commissions. I serve on 5 nonprofit boards outside of work. Like I don't do a lot of like happy hour moving my business card around kind of thing. Like I have met most folks that I have met that have helped me professionally have been through doing things in the community that I have a passion for. I coached high school soccer for 7 years, including the 2 that I was going to school at GW. And when I treated a young person well, like I ended up meeting their parents, and shocker, they had a job in the DC region that like helped open a door, right? And that's actually how I found the most connections. So there's tons of ways to get plugged into things that you can be, passionate about. And it's not just working, the happy hour circuit. Work for America's Great Grounded Idealist is also another one that was started by former USAID employees. They do job coaching. TalentCapital.ai is an operation that COG stood up that has lots of great jobs listed. But take all of our names, take all of our LinkedIn information. If you see something, and it's a small world. I mean, one of the questions earlier was about moving from one state to another. Like it's remarkably like small universe of people that kind of now that I know these folks, like if someone applied and they came from New York, I might call Julie and say, hey, do you know that like, and there are national associations that folks are part of. And, when I was with the governor of the National Governors Association, I would get to know the other chiefs of staff and like, we might have trouble hiring for a certain agency head. And I would put that out to a group of other chiefs. Hey, do you know anyone in this particular space? So keep doing things like this. Keep asking. Don't be shy. And don't be, I'm not maybe always the best at getting back right away over email. I try to, but like it is not the least bit annoying to be like, hey, I sent you this 2 weeks ago, re-upping it so it's in your inbox, and like people will get back to you, but you just got to be persistent. And it's not, like I said, I feel for folks right now who came to DC looking to start a job, particularly at the federal level, because there are strong headwinds. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's a little bit tougher than it has been.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do is finish up with Scott, if we can try to get this done in the less than 5 minutes, and then I'm going to open up breakout rooms for just 5 minutes for people to have some individual really quick. I will only keep those breakout rooms open for 5 minutes because I want to respect our panelists' time. So Scott, I would love you to add your question to this, and then
Thanks,
we'll
Denise.
open up the breakout rooms.
Yeah. Thank you, Denise. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. My question was kind of an offshoot of Kalia's. We talked about how local government is where policy meets reality. I've heard that a number of times tonight. I'm just curious what surprised you about kind of the pace and complexity of execution at that level compared to the other levels of government. I have about a decade in federal ops with a number of agencies. I graduated in 2015 and intrigued to make the transition to the local level. So what might catch me off guard? I'm just curious or surprise me. Thanks.
Honestly, I think each level of government has operations, right? Like, even the federal government has operating agencies and the state government has operating agencies, but fewer of them. They had Department of Transportation, Department of Parks, where you have this sort of real-time impact, and then the city is just it's all operating, right? It's 100%. So it's really just this, it's a scale thing. And I think if you've got experience in real-time operations, it's super translatable at the municipal level, certainly, and definitely at the state level. It's just there's much more of it, and it's the scale is much larger. Um, I wouldn't say I was necessarily shocked because underneath all of it is the same basic issues: procurement, risk, and communication and engagement. Like, these things are just sort of true everywhere in every type of government operation, even if it's not real-time service level. The constraints are pretty similar across all levels of government. And, as my colleagues here were saying, there's just like the unsexy part of government is sort of underneath everything. And if you understand procurement, you can do anything, right? Because all government is just buying stuff and giving it to people, uh, or giving it to companies. But so I think if you've got the operations experience, you can see it everywhere, and it's just more of it at the local level.
I'll say for me, getting like acclimated to the DC government, like we're kind of a weird, crazy unicorn where we are the state and local and county and school district, everything smashed together. Um, but like Julia was saying, because what we work on is very like tangible and affects people's everyday lives. I think I've heard it described as like our organizations operate in the chaotic domain where the target and the priority like can change every day. And so I've always kind of it's an enjoyable challenge to see how we can be a big city but a small town at the same time, where one angry tweet or one 311 request or something that could be very personal and hyper local and small can really affect like how the priorities are changing that day. And so, yeah, I think just sort of the level of flexibility and to be able to respond to changing priorities quickly, while at the same time being super patient to like achieve the thing you thought your job was, and how long that might take, multiple years to change the framework or change the law or the regulations. So I think that was surprising to learn, but it's also what keeps it all exciting and keeps new challenges year after year. So.
There's nothing else to add with that. I will open up the breakout rooms. I cannot thank you all enough. I want everybody to have some time to quickly, you can go into a couple of the different breakout rooms to connect with people and then engage for further conversations. This was, yeah, thank you. Really, really tremendous. I always learn a lot. I appreciate all of your time, your willingness to give back, and the work that you all do. It is tremendous and inspiring, and we just so appreciate what you do. So thank you.